All right, let's begin. Hi, Susan. Let's do this now. And
Good morning, Rabbi.
morning. Okay. There we go. Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome on this chilly morning. Refreshing morning. See, it's all how you see things. Everything is about the perspective. This beautiful, refreshing morning. We are lesson number 3, captivating cases in rabbinic responsa. This is an exciting course. I'm enjoying it. Anybody had a chance to read over some of the additional readings? Anything interesting that you found there specifically? No? So today we are going to take this a step further. In lesson one, we talked about we talked about what brings a question. What could bring a question in a rabbinic responsa case? Why someone would ask a question, and what we learn from the questions that were being asked back in the day. Today, last week, we went into the world of a rabbi with the necessity of knowing the facts on the ground, the facts of the case, to know actually what's taking place. You have to do research. You have to see why is this particular case, the specifics of the case. And so rabbis have to know a lot of information. Today we're going to shift focus to the more traditional academic side of it, the study, the research, and applying the Talmud and other halachic sources to come to the conclusion that whatever the rabbi comes to. Now, there are certain things that are standards, standard questions that I get, or that any rabbi gets. What time do I have to stop eating my chametz in Erev Pesach? Is it permissible to go to work during Shiva? Are you allowed to drink almond milk while you're having a burger? Or other questions that are more or less documented. More or less, these are questions. If you Google them, you'll get pretty much the same answer. If one day when there will be robot rabbis, there'll be pretty much the same answer that they'll give you. The problem is that not always is that the case. And sometimes there's specific issues that have to be applied. And that is where the work of a rabbi emerges, when questions are posted that don't have earlier sources, and the job is now to apply that which we already have and to make it somewhat match up to the current case. And in many cases, you won't necessarily see how they actually compare those two cases where they are. And therefore, a rabbi, for rabbis coming and tell you, this is my intuition, this is what I think, this is what I feel, then, I mean, maybe occasionally, but definitely not in most cases, a rabbi can't say that. You have to have your source. Why am I saying what I'm saying? What is the source of what I'm saying? What is the background? How did I come to this conclusion? And if you can't provide that information, then essentially what you're saying is, I'm just telling you what I feel. And that is not a halachic response. You could go to a therapist for that, but that's not Jewish law. Jewish law is, this is the sources, and this is how I am coming to my conclusion. And this is where it becomes complex, because you have to use analogous cases in the Talmud or in other teachings of Jewish law, and then apply the principles to the situation at hand. So just as an example, if you want to know laws about driving, you may have to look at what the Talmud says about a donkey or a horse, and see the laws about how horses carry things, and now compare that to how a car or a truck would carry something. So now, according to the Talmud, the method of legal reasoning, who was the very first one to apply this method of legal reasoning using analogy, was actually Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses himself. We find the case, one of the most known stories in the Torah. Moses is coming down from Mount Sinai. And God asked the Jews, do you want the Torah? And they asked, how much does it cost? And they said, it's free. They said, okay, we'll take two. So he said, okay, I'll do 2 tablets. When they started kvetching, he said, take 2 tablets and go to sleep. Now, Moses is coming down from the mountain. And what's happening? He sees they're worshiping idols, exactly. And now he's looking, and he has to make a split-second decision. Now, we all know what his decision, the conclusion of his decision was that he took the tablets, he threw them down, and he broke them. But the Talmud gives us his reasoning behind it, what he decided. What the Talmud says is that he actually used a method to come to the conclusion. Text number 1, page 103. What reasoning did Moses apply to break the tablets? He said, I was explicitly told that an idol worshiper may not eat from the paschal lamb. Right at that point, there were a few mitzvahs that they were given. One of them was to eat the Pesach lamb. So it said an idolater cannot eat the paschal lamb, which is only one of the 613 mitzvahs. So now that Israel worship the golden calf, they are certainly worthy of receiving all of the 613 mitzvahs. Are they? So he said he used a method called a kal v'chomer, which means a light and heavy. If in a lighter case, where it's just one mitzvah, that they were not allowed to, as an idolater, eat from the paschal lamb, how much more so? He said, here I'm holding all 613 mitzvahs. Yes, it's the 10 commandments, but within it had all the Torah mitzvahs. He said they're not viable at this point to receive them, and he went ahead and broke them. So, and we see later That God says, Asher Shibarta, that you broke. Yasher Kochach Asher Shibarta, God says, thank you for breaking the luchos. Of course, he had to make a second set of tablets. But God said that you made the right decision at that point. So let's begin with a fascinating, somber 15th century case involving the infamous blood libel. Blood libels were medieval ways of anti-Semitism, where they would basically blame the Jews for murdering certain individuals, usually children. And they came up with this concept that they want to use the blood for the matzah. And this was known as the blood libels. It's crazy to think that even today, people are coming up with different sorts of blood libels as well. But anyway, that's going to be case number one. Case number two is going to be another amusing yet provoking case of a seat in a synagogue. An argument broke out regarding a seat in a synagogue. Then we're going to focus on some relatively new technologies, not as new as the modern century. And then we'll take a deeper perspective in that. Today we're going to begin with the video. And that is the case that I mentioned with the blood libel. So instead of showing through the details of the case, there's a beautiful video prepared that's going to give all the details explaining exactly what took place.
Eyes. Continue. In modern history, Killing the tragedy. Body of 2-year-old Simon was found in a canal beneath the home of a Jewish family. Within days, all 18 Jewish men of the city were arrested. Under torture, they confessed to murdering the boy to use his blood in a Jewish ritual, an accusation with no basis in Jewish law or practice. All 18 were sentenced to death. The Jewish community of Trent was effectively erased. The story didn't end there. A year later, in 1476, Bishop Heinrich of Regensburg passed through Trent on his way home from Rome. He learned that one of the tortured men had named Jews in Regensburg, accusing them of committing a similar crime nearly a decade earlier. Heinrich brought the confessions to Regensburg. In the spring of 1476, the city arrested 17 of its most prominent Jews. Their families were placed under house arrest. Jewish assets across the city were frozen, and the torture began again. Some of the accused resisted, and others wrote under pressure. The resulting confessions were contradictory and confused. Dates didn't line up. Locations varied widely. Yet the authorities pressed on. They needed physical proof. So on April 22nd, 1476, the cellar of one of the accused was excavated. After 3 days, bones were discovered, said to be the remains of 4 children. Quickly surfaced. Ronnie Potter Shah, in The Myth of Ritual Murder, writes, according to a legal brief in defense 17 Jews who presented at the imperial court, the excavation was not supervised by disinterested parties. Soldiers and authorities were not called in until the 3rd day, and once actually expressed his distrust of the workers with the digging. Some thought the bones had been planted to frame the Jews. Men were seen removing bones from the Christian cemetery. The imperial court in Vienna, Emperor Frederick III ordered the Jews' release. Regensburg officials resisted, asserting their city's autonomy for criminal cases. Tense stand dragged on until May 1478. A compromise was reached. The prisoners would be freed, but only after paying an exorbitant sum, 10,000 florins to the emperor, 5,000 to the city, for the trial and prison costs, 8,000 more to cover a fine the emperor had levied against the city for their disobedience in this case. In total, 23,000 florins, an little sum. Though Jews across the region gave generously, it wasn't enough. The prisons remained locked away. German rabbis convened in Nuremberg. Could they impose a tax on every Jewish community in the empire to free the Jews of Regensburg? Or could they go to buy justice?
So this is the case. Now I will point out, being that this may come up, this was not this is not a case of typical hostage taking, where if they would have been freed, then the hostages they may have taken more for money. In this particular case, it became very clear that had they paid off the emperor, it's gonna quiet the place down, and they wouldn't see any. At least that was a strong belief that if they would if they would be able to pay this off, that would settle things, and they would be in a much better situation. But the question now is, who should have that responsibility? So during the Middle Ages, Jewish communities had some degree of legal autonomy, as we talked about in lesson 1, and there was no federal authority over them. But that also meant that they had to deal with their own problems. And now comes the question of, does another city's issues affect Jews in another city? Do they have that responsibility? And the question obviously is not, should they do it out of the good of their heart, but whether they can obligate, whether another city can obligate a city nearby to participate in this, what we would call tax at the time. To be clear, tzedakah, charity, in most of these communities was considered like a tax. So it wasn't like we're doing a campaign, an online campaign, everyone please donate whatever you could. It was, if you're part of the community, you have to give X amount of tzedakah. And the question now is, could the other communities have this placed on them as a debt to save the Jews of Regensburg? And so now comes the question. Here's the case 17, again, to be clear, 17 Jewish men were murdered. Freeing them came as an exorbitant cost. The rabbis were inclined to impose a tax on other Jewish communities of the Holy Empire. And now they're unsure of the legitimacy of the tax, so they reached out for guidance. So this is the case. And the question becomes now, can all Jews in the Holy Roman Empire be taxed to fund the release of the Jews in Regensburg? So this was presented to one of the great rabbis at the time, Rabbi Yosef Kolon, also known as the Maharik, who lived in Pavia, near Milan. And he was one of the central figures at the time. And so the Maharik used a case that is completely, seemingly irrelevant to this sort of situation, has nothing to do with prisoners, nothing to do with blood libels, has nothing to do with, other governments or taxes. Rather, he said, we have to look at a case. He looked at a case that had some precedent with regard to communal water system. And it comes like this. Take a look in exercise case 1, page 107. A river flows through multiple communities. Over time, Sedimentation causes reduced downstream flow. Who is responsible for the sediment removal? Now, as you see in the picture, there are three communities. All right, let's just call it the Spanish Springs, the Lake Sumter, and the Brownwood. Okay, and they have a water that's flowing between the communities, and now there is some way that it's being blocked, which means that those that are further down the stream are going to be affected. Those up the stream are not affected. Their water is flowing fine. But those further down the stream are going to be affected because it's the sediment is causing a lack in the water flow. It's not being completely blocked, but it is slowing down the water flow. Case number 2. A drainage canal that removes water from roads serves multiple communities and a hillside. The canal becomes clogged, preventing water from draining. Who is responsible for the clearing of the blockage? So over here, it's an issue, not that the water flow is slowing down, but that there is a blockage. The water won't be able to drain, and eventually what's going to happen is there's going to be a flood. So who is responsible? Says the Talmud, so he says, let's take a look at the Talmud. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, says Rabbi Yehuda, concerning the digging of a river, the lower ones must assist the upper ones, but the upper ones need not assist the lower ones. The reverse is true regarding draining the rainwater. So this is all the Talmud says. So now we have Rashi who helps us. Those who came to our Talmud course knows that sometimes the words of the Talmud may need some explaining, let's just say. So Rashi is explaining the Talmud. It says like this: when those upstream repair their obstruction in the river that's adjacent to their community, the downstream communities are obligated to assist them, since a blockage upstream prevents water from flowing towards them. Thus, fixing the upper section benefits those downstream. So it's saying when those upstream are fixing that blockage, those who are lower down the stream will gain from that because the water is going to now flow better towards them. But the upper ones need not assist the lower ones when repairs are made downstream because these do not benefit those upstream. In fact, the repairs below harm those upstream. The more water that rushes forward, the less water is available upstream, which risks their fields of drying out. The reverse is true regarding draining rainwater. This applies to a city where excessive rainwater causes mud buildup and road damage. So a drainage channel is built to divert water outside the city. If a blockage occurs in a section belonging to the lower residents, requiring it to be dug out, those upstream must assist in clearing it, because as long as the lower section remains clogged, water will accumulate and flood the upper areas. However, the lower ones have no obligation to assist the lower ones in clearing drain blockages in the higher area, because the residents below favor that the upper water does not drain to the lower area. So again, it's a rather simple concept, which is over here when you have the sediment, which is blocking the flow. Okay. So the guy on top doesn't even want it to be cleared, because then they'll have a better water flow. So therefore, this guy helps out, but the other one has to help out, because this way they'll get a better water flow. C will get a better water flow. Right? Pretty simple. Case number 2, and see it, is the opposite. If there's a blockage here, this guy gains nothing from that being clear, but the guy on top does, because if this is not clear, his whole thing could be flooded here. Right? So in case number 1, Spanish Springs will be freed from paying In case number two, Brownwood would be freed from paying. Is that clear, or should we explain that again?
Yeah.
Explain it again. You have two cases. Over here, case number one, you have water that is getting in the way of flowing. It's not completely blocking it. This is completely blocked. Over here, the water's flowing, but there's some sediment there that's holding it. The top of the mountain, do they care if the water is being blocked at this point? Do they care if that's going to be clear? No, because if anything, it's better for them. They have a better flow up here. They have more water. The more water that's flowing down means the slower water that's going to be flowing where they are. So B and C are being affected. So the ones being affected have to pay. Over here, with this blockage, right now, there's no water flowing to C. But if, let's assume this is going to be cleared. Let's assume you're going to completely clear this out. This is not, to be clear, this is not it's not to water the fields, but it's simply water that's passing by. And so what's going to happen if A and B don't clear this? They're going to be flooded, but C is not going to be affected from it, right?
So the only difference would be is whether the flow of the water affects irrigation of the crops.
Right, but the bottom line is it going to affect me based on what happens? Is this going to affect me? Is it going to benefit me? Let's give another example. Let's say, we had last night, we as I mentioned, we had a blackout, right? And what happened was there was certain there was a line that was knocked out and it had to be repaired. Now, obviously, we're paying we're paying the electric company regularly to go and fix things like that. Let's say the way it worked was that if something breaks, whoever is affected by that line has to pay. So now, what are you going to say? You're going to say that whoever is on that line of power has to be, whoever's on that line of power has to pay in order to get it fixed. Now, let's say there's something that breaks in the grid, in the main power, and that can affect a larger area, certain people that are beyond where this is specifically affected. And the power company is saying, look, this grid is weak. Right now, down in Wildwood, you guys have power, but if we don't fix this grid, in a week from now, you guys will be out of power too. And so they're coming to Wildwood and saying, you need to participate in the grid, in the power that's in the grid now, even though only Oxford is being affected, but Wildwood in a week from now, you're going to be affected too. Because it's not just a line that fell down, it's the grid, and that's going to affect you as well. And so now they could come and say, even though you're not being affected right this minute, but you're going to be affected. And so they could come to Wildwood and say, look, this is affecting you too, you have to help pay for it. Does that make sense? So in other words, whoever is being affected has to pay. In this particular case, in the first case, A is not being affected at all. As a matter of fact, they would rather have a slower stream down here because it means a better stream for them that they could irrigate their fields. Over here, C, he's not being affected by this either because he's not going to be flooded. It's the ones up there that are going to be flooded.
But a question. In the olden times, and I know this happens in the Netherlands, where they use the stream of the water to turn the water wheel to give them, either electricity or other types of power. So under those circumstances, who would be responsible for the painting if it affects
So
the entire community later on by the quality.
so this
Loss.
this specific case has to be examined based on the principle. And this is the principle. The principle is, are you going to be affected? Now, you may not be affected right this second. Are you going to be affected in a week from now, in a year from now? But are you going to be affected by whatever's happening? And if you are going to be affected, then you have to pay. And it's up to the rabbi to make, to discern that particular situation.
Okay.
Let's continue on. 5a, text 5a. The other, yeah.
It's not the bill, the benefit is for the control, he built the dam there, yeah.
Okay, again, these are all what if cases. And ultimately, right now, it's about the principle. The principle is who is being affected. And obviously, if on top of the hill they do things that they shouldn't be because it's affecting other people in the community, then they're not allowed to do that. They have the HOA laws. They can't just do whatever they want. We're going to talk about HOA laws soon. Text 5a. Based on this, Rabbi the Maharik came to a conclusion that could we now say with those incarcerated that those who are not incarcerated from the other communities, would they be affected by what is happening right now in this city of Regensburg? And so comes the question, are other Jews being affected or not? Text 5a. It is well known and widely recognized that the imprisonment of our brethren from the holy community of Regensburg, may the rock protect them, strengthen them, is an event that poses potential harm and danger not only to Regensburg and its surrounding areas, but to many other communities as well. The rabbis who have gathered in Nuremberg to save those wrongly sentenced to death emphasize this point in their letter to me. So the rabbis there said that if we don't do something about the situation, then it could affect other areas as well. And so he's establishing this fundamental historical law, recognizing that the Jews of Regensburg are not facing this alone, but this, so to speak, water stream is going to hit them as well one day. This flowing water of anti-Semitism, of blood libels, is going to hit them as well. And the dominoes are going to start to fall. And so, while the Jews of Regensburg may be acquitted and free, if they're actually able to clear this situation up, and then the noblemen, the bishops, and the city leaders would see that the accusations are false, and therefore, hopefully the cycle of prosecution would end. So, in the original assumption, it looks like who's in danger? Those in Regensburg are in danger, and so therefore, the others in Regensburg would be responsible to pay. He goes on to say that actually it's not only that community that's in danger, but it's other communities as well. Let's continue on. In my humble opinion, any Jewish community that's reasonably at risk would almost certainly face the same fate, God forbid, if this matter was not properly addressed. These communities must take part in financial burden. Saving the holy community of Regensburg ultimately means saving themselves as well. While the opposite outcome in Regensburg would bring dire consequences to them, heaven forbid. Even though at this moment the libel is directed only at Regensburg and not at the other locations, still, because the calamity and inevitability spread to them as well, they are judged based on what is bound to occur obligating them to contribute to the expenses of saving the holy community of Regensburg. May their rock protect and strengthen them. Evidence, in my opinion, can be found in the Talmud Tractate Bamatia, which obligates those living higher up to assist those below in repairing a drainage channel to direct water out of the city. The reasoning is that if the lower waters do not flow out, the upper waters will remain trapped in the higher areas. It's obviously then the water is blocked at the bottom of the channel, does not immediately impact the higher portion of the channel. Rather, the water gradually rises until it affects the upper area. Nevertheless, as the damage will eventually reach the upper area, there's no distinction between earlier and later, and the people higher up are required to assist now. The same applies here. Even though the immediate harm and danger is currently befalling the holy community of Regensburg, it is well known that others are also at risk, heaven forbid. They are therefore obligated to assist them, as I have explained. So, one is only obligated to pay for what affects them, but similar to the case of the water that's of the blockage, if that water is not being drained out, then those on top, even though right now they're not being affected, but eventually it's going to flood them as well. They're going to be affected. So the same thing here. He says this flood of blood libels is going to affect you as well one day if we don't stop it and nip it in the bud right now in this current situation. And so he says, even though the fact that right now in this moment, you're not facing that, but it's going to affect you. And so we have to worry about that now. However, there's still a problem. And that is that it seems that the case of the Talmud is talking about an inevitable harm. In the case of the blood libel, is it actually inevitable? Do we know something's going to happen? Is it completely comparable to the case of the Talmud? So he continues on 5c. One might attempt to distinguish and argue that in the Talmud's case, the obligation for those higher up to assist is because the eventual damage to them is inevitable. However, here one might say that the spread of this false and slanderous accusation to other places is uncertain. But in truth, we see that sadly there's focused conspiracy to attack and incite against us. May God in his abundant mercy save us from their hands. In such a situation, the harm is considered to be certain. Not such cases is said, praise is the person who is always vigilant. So he was of the opinion that it is pretty much inevitable. In the 1470s in Germany, it was happening so common, the blood libels, that it was almost an inevitable threat, he says. And if you take a look in figure 3.3, you see the blood libels that were going on at that time, 1470s. In 1470, blood libel, 3 Jews executed and all Jewish families expelled. In Persian, blood libel, 4 Jews executed. In Frankfurt, blood libel, Jewish community offers money to the emperor to intervene and save them. Regensburg, 1474, blood libel, Rabbi Yisrael of Brunna, assisted by the emperor, orders his release. Regensburg, 1475. Trent, 1475. 1476, Passau, Nuremberg, Salzburg. So the fear of charges of ritual murder. So the Marik recognized that there is this trend, blood libels and claims. They were spreading rapidly, and he says this movement would place other communities in harm if we don't deal with it now. Now, I should point out, there were other rabbis who had later studied this that felt differently, like Rabbi Yosef ibn Ezra, who says that money cannot be extracted from people without a possible certainty. However, there are those who looked at it and said he was living at a different time in a different situation. In the case of the Maharik, it was pretty clear that it was certain danger that was going to follow suit. But again, this is the job of the rabbi to say, look, we don't have a case in the Talmud that talks about blood libels, but what he was actually doing is he's pinpointing the situation. He's sort of removing all the dust and going to the core of the issue. He says the core of the issue here is not about a blood libel. The core of the issue here in this particular case is what is the responsibility of a community towards other communities? And the same thing with the water flow. He said the core of that issue there is not about water or sediment or houses. It's about what is the responsibility of one community towards another. We take that common denominator and we match it up. But we have to be careful to make sure that the common denominator actually does match up. Because if there is anything that overlaps or doesn't fit properly, then it may not be a proper fit. And so this is the job of the rabbi to put those common denominators together and to come to a conclusion. Anyway, he came to the conclusion that the obligation to contribute was not just simple charity, but it was a financial duty. In the end, likely due to this responsum, enough money was raised. In September 1480, about 3.5 years after their imprisonment, the 17 Jews of Regensburg were freed. And if you take a look historically, his political and sociological analysis seemed to prove right. Because although in the 1470s there were numerous blood accusations against the Jews, not a single additional case arose during the remainder of this Emperor Frederick III. He died in 1493, and for a decade thereafter, there were no known blood libels that took place. Instead, the anti-Jewish rhetoric shifted towards economic grievances, focusing on money lending and things like that. There's always find something, but the blood libels stopped. And so he was right that resolving the Regensburg affair affected other communities as well. And so that was that situation. So, but we have here the opportunity to observe a rabbi confronting a unique situation, applying it to a Talmudic passage, and now coming to a conclusion by matching everything up. Any questions? Yes.
What do you think is they're debating this based on the rights and happens to them whether they should go?
Correct. Will it affect me or not?
Jews and countries where the Jews need help, I don't understand that concept of it.
But can you require payment? Again, we're not talking about making a fund and asking people to contribute out of the goodness of their heart. Could you actually make a tax-like? In America, we don't have such a concept, right? There's no such thing as a community. I mean, it would be nice if they did, but there's no such thing as a community saying you are required to pay X amount to contribute to the community, to the synagogues, to the poor people. They're required.
Should anything be required? When people need help, we're supposed to help. We're paid to have Jewish children taken out of Germany. Why does it have to be in the long lots of benefits we have?
If everyone thought that way, then Jewish community, the Jewish organizations wouldn't have to collect money. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. Right? We don't. Yeah. I mean, but again, we live in an autonomous environment in the United States where we're a free country. But back in the day, it wasn't the case. And like I said, when you had a community, there was obligation, and they would come knocking at your door and say, you owe X amount towards the charitable fund And they were required to pay that. It wasn't like, can you please donate, you know? I mean, you do have like a little bit, you have like synagogue dues by some synagogues. But again, that's not, over here, we're talking about providing for the entire community. And every individual is required to put money in that pot to give to the entire community. You know, my father-in-law runs an organization in New York, in Crown Heights, that actually gives money to poor people to buy food. And it's a relatively large Jewish community, Crown Heights, but still, it doesn't come easy. He has to pull teeth and knock on doors to begging them to give. There's no required amount saying that you have to give X amount to feed the poor in your community. It's just the reality of the type of community that we live in. Back in the day, this was part of the Jewish community. If you don't follow, you're out. You're not part of the community. Goodbye. Find another place to live. Right. Exactly. It's like an HOA. Exactly. Yes.
So perhaps to explain my logic, the principle of a tax is to, when society needs something, to raise a certain amount to benefit the whole society.
Right.
Whereas reliance on charities, a law of economics,
Right.
principles of economics, charity can raise enough as the tax bill because it is not compulsory. And people make decisions based upon self-interest as well as moral reason. And the self-interest will cause them as a totality to give that that is required to accomplish the social goal and desire.
Well, that's coming with the assumption that charity is not a tax. I'm saying that back in the day, charity was a tax.
But only
Wasn't-
in this circumstance, in order to save.
No, charity was a tax. That's the way it was. You live in the community you live in the village's community. Every single Jew, let's say there's 1,000 Jews in the community, and we have to raise, let's say, $500,000 to pay for the poor people that are living here. Every single person will get a knock on their door, whatever it is, every Friday or every once a month, whatever it is, you get a knock on your door. Your dues for your monthly dues of whatever it is, $1,000 is still unpaid. Please pay it, and that's the way it is. We think of charity as giving out of the goodness of my heart. That's the concept of philanthropy. Philanthropy means giving out of the goodness of my heart. Actually, charity in Hebrew is tzedakah. Tzedakah means righteousness. It means I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. And you can go into the argument of how the tax how that should affect people. Based on should the taxes be higher for the governmental aspect of it. But over here we're talking about as far as the Jewish community goes specifically. And yeah, they had to pay government taxes as well. That was aside for that. Yeah.
So you're calling it a tax, I'm using the models, is the history government's nailed to a closet floor tap.
Again, this you were talking about modern day tzedakah.
You were talking back to like the Philippines.
That's still modern day. This is back in the day. We live in a free society, so nobody can force anyone to do anything today. But this is the way it was. The way it was you had a collector, and then they went and distributed food. They had either food kitchens or soup kitchens or whatever they called it then. And the poor people in the community were given food. Every Friday they would come give food to the poor people. And that was collected from the community. And you had an obligation to give X amount, be it 5%, 10%, whatever it was that they were collecting. They were forcing an amount. Yes, yes. You had to give. Well, no, this is the obligation of the Jewish community. If you're part of the Jewish community, then Ruvain has to worry about Shimon, his poor neighbor. The truth is that's the way it should be.
So they choose to live in that issue, but not around it.
Yes, and not only that, but if there's someone visiting, there's a whole question Talmud discusses. If there's someone visiting, are they allowed to take from the communal fund? You know, and then it comes to how many days are you there? And if you're X amount of days, then you'll be required to give to that communal fund. The Talmud goes through these situations. And again, we don't live in that type of environment today, but that's the way it was. All right, but if you take a look at the laws in Torah about charity are not, they are obligatory. This is what you have to do. The fact that, you know, people don't live up to that, and people, you know, that's because of the society we live in, where it's a free society. But the fact of the matter is, the way it really should be is, everybody should be required to give X amount to tzedakah. We just don't have a system today that could force that.
You would say 10%.
Some say 10%, at 5% at a minimum. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, some say you should give 20%. Yeah, no, the word tzedakah means righteousness, which means that if I have X amount and my neighbor can't afford even basic necessities, the right thing to do is to put aside my luxuries and make sure that they have. That's what tzedakah actually means. That's the righteousness. Okay, let's continue on. With that being said, we're going to get a little bit lighter here. This is a really interesting piece about the shul seats, the seats in the shul. Let's take a look, text number 6. This was presented to Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Sheshes, known as the Rivash. They always had a little acronym name. To Jetiva, to the God-fearing Rabbi Pinchas Bar Shelemia Lunal. There's Sephardic names, as you can see. Question. A community has a synagogue in their city. A wealthy man from the city purchased many seats there at a low price. Due to his actions, the value of the seats increased. As the price rose, he raised the rental fees to the point that renters were deterred from attending the synagogue because of the high cost of seating. The community wanted to add more seats in available spaces within the synagogue and to sell those seats to various people. This would benefit the community financially and also encourage more people to attend synagogue using the newly added seats. However, the wealthy man objected, arguing that the new seats would restrict access to his seats. Even if there would be still sufficient space to pass through, the passage would be narrower than before. You ask whether the wealthy man is justified in his claim.
The question,
Now one second. So now we're laughing at this, but the truth is, in medieval Spain, things were different than the way we have it today. And we learn, again, as I said at the very beginning of the course, we learn about the social issues that would come up from these responsa, which is that a seat in the shul was considered like real estate. You buy it, you own it, and you can rent it. And if there's a wealthy person that wants to invest, they say, I'm not going to buy one seat, I'll buy 10, rent it out and make money. And this was the way it is. And you were not allowed to participate in the synagogue unless you had a seat that was paid for. And it wasn't just that you had to buy a ticket. You had to have a seat. You know, they say, there was a show on Broadway. It was a very high-end show. And there's a couple Mr. and Mrs. Greenberg, we'll call them, they went to the Broadway show. And they're sitting there and they got these beautiful seats up front. Very, very expensive seats. $10,000 seats. And sitting next to them was a woman and there was an empty seat. And they said, an empty seat over here. Look how much it's the value of that seat is. And they asked the woman, they said, were you supposed to come with someone? Was this supposed to someone to be sitting in the seat next to you? She said, yeah, that's the seat of my late husband. She says, oh, I'm sorry, being so insensitive. I'm really, we shouldn't have asked that. But maybe you could have got a friend or someone else that would have come with you. She says, no, they're all at the Shiva now. Anyway, okay. So,
Well,
anyway, so over here, it wasn't just a mere privilege to use the seat, but it was an actual real estate asset. And here you have this guy. I mean, we don't really find of other cases like this, really. But in this particular case, in medieval Spain, that's how it worked. And so this particular Jativa, wherever that is, they were building the shul. They tried to raise funds, and they wanted more people to come to shul. There weren't enough seats. To just say I'm going to make another shul wasn't so simple. You had to have the government and the state and the approvals that you needed and the red tape to go build a shul wasn't simple. So all they were saying was, we want to put another row of seats. And the problem was that would take up some, you have a seat here or in the back? The problem was that was going to take up some of it's going to block off the entranceway for the higher cost seats, which were the aisle seats. To a degree, right. Okay. But regardless, the guy that had invested in those seats said, I pay big money for these seats because they're aisle seats, they're more expensive seats. And now I want to get you put another row and the value of my seats goes down. And so this was the question that came up. Imagine if they did that for airlines, right?
They do.
Yeah. And but I'm saying, imagine if you're able to buy your specific seat. So they right. Okay. Anyway, so the community wanted to have more seats, but he said, no, I want those seats and I don't want you to block it off. So again, he pulled another case in the Talmud out. The Rivash says like this. And again, he goes to the heart of the issue. What's the heart of the issue? Can the shul add more seats taking space from the wealthy man's wide aisles? So he says, let's try and see if there's another case that could compare to this. Text number 7, Talmud Baba Basra. Rav Huna says, if a resident of a lane wants to build a structure on the lane adjacent to their courtyard entrance, the other residents of the lane can prevent this because it will require them to circumvent the structure. Okay, so this is again HOA laws. If you have a open lane that passes through between two communities here, we have houses here, and then they have that courtyard, and then we have someone that wants to put some sort of structure that would block that lane. He said the other residents could prevent this because we require them to circumvent the structure. Now, as we get in the way, and basically what he's saying is that if you have an HOA and certain communities together, even something that would just make it inconvenient would be problematic as well. Even if that inconvenience means I would have to just move out of my way in order to get through, to get to the entranceway, that would be probable. That would be a problem as well. And so he decides to install an object near the entrance of the courtyard, even if it's something simple, a bench, a platform, a bicycle rack. Nevertheless, he says, if it's getting in the way of them, of their having direct passageway, then that's a problem. Just that obstruction there. And so he says, in our case is clear, he said that the wealthy seats is correct. The wealthy man is correct in arguing that his seats, he had that passageway paid for, and he deserves to have that by his community, the access, or for his renters to have that space available and not make an error.
I don't agree with you. Because it says there's sufficient space to pass. If there's sufficient space to pass.
But even if it makes an error in this particular case,
Yes.
even if he's going to block off part of that passageway
Yes.
with the bench or whatever, if it gets partially, even if it's partially obstructing it, making it inconvenient. Again, it's not saying it's completely blocking, making it inconvenient for them. The Talmud makes it clear that's a problem, and he is using that. And he's using that assertion to work in our case as well. However, what do you do? And it says that these are laws of HOA. But he says there may be a workable solution. Somewhat. And he says that the Talmud says that residents of a city may establish local standards for measurements, product pricing, and wages to impose fines for noncompliance. So he says, while you cannot obstruct the entranceway to the seats, you could establish rules as far as not allowing, putting caps or minimum for the wages or the prices or the cost of the seats. He said that you are allowed to do. So you could say, the price kept going up, the value of the seats, because there was a more desire, because the demand. You could say you're not allowed to raise the prices past X amount, because that would, if that's what the community agrees with. So over here, he actually was taking two approaches. Again, it's not the Talmud isn't suggesting that it's wise economic policies, but again, this is about a communal interest in a particular situation, where he's saying they do have the right to claim that you can't block off their pathway, but at the same time, you also have the right to control their rents. So he says the community should set caps on shul seat rentals. Well, today we don't have. Right. But this is a different issue. This is an issue of an individual who had invested in a seat, which obviously we don't have that concept today. Anyone else have a question? Any question?
Rabbi, that concept of the student show, it's going to be a lot more. Or both better seats.
Okay.
It sounds to me that it's acceptable in Judaism that it happens. It shows our life.
If that's what the community decides, obviously in Chabad we don't hold to that idea. But
Is it that?
yeah.
Yes. Interesting access, okay. What about peasants? You should not choose to come to the right? They deserve it, they want it, they deserve from the this is that actually take into consideration. Religion, for those who they want.
Again, so what we have to do is, the job of the rabbi is to put aside any personal considerations or feelings and say we have to move aside all and any dirt or issues in the way to get to the core of the issue. Right now, the core of the issue is not a spiritual one. It is a practical question of real estate, because that's the reality of the question. And so we can now compare it to another real estate question. It's a communal HOA real estate question. And so we could compare that to another communal HOA real estate situation. And that's the job of the rabbi, to find the core issues and the common denominators, even though on the surface they look much different. Right? So it's not about, it's the rabbi in this particular case, the rabbi's job is dealing with a financial issue. It's not a spiritual issue. If the rabbis were able to sort it out spiritually and convince the guy that, you're not allowing people to come to shul, obviously they would have, but that wasn't the case with that guy, to the extent that they had to present this question to a rabbi in another community, because obviously he wasn't willing to give in. And he may have been a bully, I don't know what was the case there. But the rabbi came to the core of the issue, which is, it's not about a synagogue, it's about a financial real estate question.
But the reality of it will show something. They keep performance. It's my view.
A lot of people would say that they were not allowed into shuls back in the day. I don't know how much that has changed. Obviously in Chabad we never had that policy, but many shuls did.
Usually they get active
Cannot deny them. I mean, a lot of
cities.
from
Stations like you call the people and say, listen, I would like to come to Bibles services and but I don't have any money. I have to get to your temple. What ends up happening is there's all those organizations that have money that they give to the temple for you to go. Right. They do.
The issue is, again, we're talking about in a society that's a free society. And if you want, you could buy another property next door and you could build another synagogue and you could go in competition. Back in the day in medieval Spain, you couldn't just say, let's just build another synagogue. It wasn't the case. It just wasn't obviously, if it was easy to come by in a situation, they wouldn't have to present the question to a rabbi. It was because it wasn't simple. And there was one communal synagogue that was all that was allowed by the government, this one communal synagogue, and they had sold the seats. Whether or not that was smart, that's the way it was. And this was the reality that they were facing, and they had to now deal with the problem.
From a philosophical note, since the synagogue is the replacement for the Beis HaMikdash, and the Beis HaMikdash was open to everybody, why were they allowed to have those particular seats and deny people access when the Beis HaMikdash was open to everyone? Why not use that type of logic and say that he could not?
Because that's not the question. Because that's not the question. That's not this case. First of all, who said maybe everyone was allowed in, but they just couldn't have seats. So maybe they were praying. Obviously, if it
appears from this that some people were prevented from going.
correct.
Well, that is the antithesis of the whole concept of a show.
Or I don't know if they were prevented from going, or they just didn't come because they couldn't get a seat. Maybe there was standing room. I don't know. But again, we're coming to this.
No limit.
The preface to your question was from a philosophical standpoint, but that's not.
Right.
That's not where we're at. We're at a reality of this case.
Okay, I'm just.
Yeah.
What I asked more like at least the latter thing, where it is to be enough for me, but
Because that's not what it is. It's a real estate. It's a real estate purchase. But it is. Then it was considered that way.
Wait.
If it wasn't, then he wouldn't be the one that's allowed to rent it out. It was that you own the seat, and now you have the right to rent it out, whatever you want, at whatever cost you want. That's real estate. People do that all the time. They own seats and they rent it out on StubHub or whatever. Yeah.
In all our
What if you have box seats And then the ballpark comes and says, you know what, we need more seats. I'm gonna now put a row, but it's gonna block off your seat. You think that guy that paid for those box seats won't complain about that?
Yeah.
Maybe he didn't want a refund. Yeah,
You repeat your first statement, it's not about how you feel.
right, exactly. It says, exactly. Anyway,
Well, it's free transaction.
exactly. That's what I've been trying to say. It's a real estate transaction question. Okay, let's go on. We're gonna move now into technology. Now, when I talk about technology here, I'm not talking about 21st century technology. I'm not talking about 21st century technology. I'm talking about what was considered technology, a few decades ago. And we're going to see some questions that were brought up. So let's take a look, because of course technology is always something that comes up and continues to. Now, 21st century technology we're going to address in lesson 6. But what happens when you have some technological innovations, ingenious new ideas, devices that come up? So let's give a few examples. Look at figure page 124. It's I'm a little behind on time, so we're going to try and do this quickly. This is something called an astrolabe. Rabbi Shlomo ben Aderet the Rashba. This was in 1235 in Barcelona. This was considered a new technology then. I'm soon going to show you what an astrolabe is. An hourglass. And the question is about being used on Shabbos. An hourglass, can a sand clock hourglass be moved on Shabbos? It explains, I'm not going to go into the details because I don't have time now. A spinning wheel, a talus made of silk, should the tassels be made of wool, linen, or silk? Printing press, do printed Jewish books have the same sanctity as manuscripts? Firearms, a Jew accidentally shot his wagon driver while playing with his gun. What must he do to atone? Telescope, can one recite the blessing of the new moon if it's viewed through a telescope? Umbrella, can umbrella be used on Shabbos and holidays? What if a non-Jew is holding it for a Jew? Vaccine. In turn, physicians administering the smallpox vaccine pass through a village on Shabbos. It is permissible to have one children vaccinated on that day. Again, it wasn't just like you could go to CVS and get all the vaccines available. You had certain people administer, and that was it. Machineries, a machine matzah, kosher for Passover. Telegraph, can telegraph poles and wires be used as part of an eruv to surround the city to carry on Shabbos? Locomotive, can the construction of a train track over a cemetery or desecration of the dead make Kohanim ride in such trains if that's the case? Electricity, can electric lights be used for Shabbos or turn them off on Shabbos? Photographs, is it permissible to have one's photograph taken? And hot air balloons, does a hot air balloon hovering over a sukkah invalidate it? So we're going to just take a look at the first and last of the two. The first one is an astrolabe. Now, many of you are asking, what is an astrolabe? So we got a quick explanation of what an astrolabe is from this video.
What time is it? What time is it? If you glance at your iPhone, it's so simple to tell the time. But I'd like to ask you, how would you tell the time if you didn't have an iPhone? How would you tell the time, say, 600 years ago? How would you do it? Well, the way you would do it is by using a device that's called an astrolabe. So an astrolabe is relatively unknown in today's world, but at the time, in the 13th century, it was the gadget of the day. It was the world's first popular computer, and it was a device that, in fact, is a model of the sky. So the different parts of the astrolabe in this particular type, the reed corresponds to the position of the stars, the plate corresponds to a coordinate system, and the mater has some scales and puts it all together. If you were an educated child, you would know how to not only use the astrolabe, you would also know how to make an astrolabe. Know this because the first treatise on the astrolabe, the first technical manual in the English language, was written by Geoffrey Chaucer. Yes, that Geoffrey Chaucer in 1391 to his little Louis, his 11-year-old son. And in this book, little Louis would know the big idea. The central idea that makes this computer work is this thing called stereographic projection. And basically the concept is, how do you represent the three-dimensional image of the night sky that surrounds us onto a flat, portable two-dimensional surface? The idea is actually relatively simple. Imagine that the Earth is at the center of the universe, and surrounding it is the sky projected onto a sphere. Each point on the surface of the sphere is mapped through the bottom pole onto a flat surface where it's then recorded. So the North Star corresponds to the center of the device. The ecliptic, which is the path the sun, moon, and planets, correspond to an offset circle. The bright stars correspond to little daggers on the reed. And the altitude corresponds to the plate system. Now, the real genius of the astrolabe is not just the projection. The real genius is that it brings together two coordinate systems so they fit perfectly. There's the position of the sun, moon, and planets on the movable reed, and then there's their location on the sky as seen from a certain latitude on the back plate. Okay, so how would you use this device? Well, let me first back up for a moment. This was an astrolabe. Pretty impressive, isn't it? And so this astrolabe is on loan from us from the Oxford School of Museum of History. And you can see the different components. This is the meter, the scales on the back. This is the reed. Okay, you see that? That's the movable part of the sky. And in the back, you can see like a spiderweb pattern. And that spiderweb pattern corresponds to the local coordinates of the sky. This is a rule device. And on the back are some other devices, measuring tools, and scales to be able to make some calculations. Okay? You know, I've always wanted one of these. For my thesis, I actually built one of these out of paper. This is a replica from a 15th century device, and it's worth probably about 3 MacBook Pros. But a real one would cost about as much as my house. And that's next to it, and actually every house in the block on both sides of the street, maybe a school thrown in, and so, a church. They're just incredibly expensive. But let me show you how to work this device. So let's go to step 1. First thing that you do is you select a star in the night sky if you're telling time at night. So tonight, if it's clear, you'll be able to see the summer triangle, and there's a bright star called Deneb. So let's select Deneb. Second is you measure the altitude of Deneb. So step 2, I hold the device up, and then I sight its altitude there, so I can see it clearly now. And then I measure its altitude. So it's about 26 degrees. Can't see it from over there. Step 3 is identify the star on the front of the device. Deneb is there, I can tell. Step 4 is I then move the reed, move the sky, so the altitude of the star corresponds to the scale on the back. Okay, so when that happens, everything lines up. I have here the model of the sky that corresponds to the real sky. Okay, so it is, in a sense, holding a model of the universe in my hands. And then finally, I take a rule and move the rule to a date line, which then tells me the time here. Right, so that's how the device is used.
All right, so
It's a lot of work, isn't it?
I'm gonna stop it there. But now let's go to the issue. So this was actually brought between Rabbi Shlomo ben Aderet and Shalos Tshuvis, known as the Rashba. We mentioned him in our first lesson. Text number 9, the astrolabe. The Perpignan, they were from southern France, and they were Jews who were inclined to study philosophy. Regarding your question, it's permitted to use an astrolabe on Shabbos. So, star, astro means a star, labe means take. So you're taking the stars to find this technology, as we just explained. And what would be the issue with Shabbos? It would be assembling a loose-fitting item. So you would be assembling this thing on Shabbos. So he brought down the Talmud that says, Talmud and Shabbos, says the house of Rav Chama, there was a sectional bed, which they would reassemble on the festivals. One of the sheikhs said to him, "What's your reasoning to permit it?" He replied, "I agree with the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who says that if it's a loose fitting, it's permitted." So the law is, you're not allowed to build something on Shabbos. It's called Bona. There's 39 laws of Shabbos. One of them is you're not allowed to build. Now, when we talk about building, what is considered building? So, in other words, how much labor is building? Are you allowed to use Legos? Is that considered building? And that's a question that comes up to rabbis in modern day. No, it's if the children are allowed to play with it. So he's using this Talmud that talks about a sectional bed and says that if it's already mostly fitted and you're not actually building anything, you're just sort of putting things in place, then that's not considered building. And so assembling something loose fitting does not fall under the prohibition of Bona and is therefore permissible on Shabbos and Yantif. And so the question was, is it permitted to use an astrolabe on Shabbos? So he said, with regards to an astrolabe, it does not require force to assemble. So it's permitted to assemble and use it on Shabbos. Now, there's another issue that was not brought up, which is about measuring. So I'm not sure why that's not an issue. But I guess the question was simply about assembling the astrolabe on Shabbos. Yeah.
I mean, the side question, so if it, with this, if it's a temporary, monitoring. So with children today, with the concept of Legos, are they allowed to use Legos?
So based on this, a lot of there are those that say that the Legos is not considered building because you're just putting it together, but you're gonna take it apart unless it's the Lego set that you're building to actually keep, which sometimes people do as a hobby, then that may be a bigger issue. Let's go to one more case. We have only 5 minutes left. We're going to fast forward to 1908. There was a festival of Sukkot about to begin. The Rabbi of Lodz, Rabbi Moshe Perlmutter, he was asked a question that there was a new invention called a hot air balloon. That'll be on page 133. 1/3. Okay. A hot air balloon. And the question was as follows. We know that a sukkah has to be under the sky. What if there is a hot air balloon hovering over your sukkah? Is that considered sitting under the stars or not? This was a question. Listen, if you don't ask, then text number 11. Shalos Chuvas Evan Shaham. By the grace of God, before dawn of 13th of Tishrei, 5669, 1908. So that's Erev Sukkot, 13th of Tishrei. Our teacher, Rabbi Shalom Mordechai HaKohen, chief judge of the community of Berezhny, page, it's not 133?
133.
133, that's what I said. Live and be well. I have been struck by a new matter that has never arisen before. Inventors have recently brought into reality the ability to soar in a hot air balloon. Humans control it so that if they would remain stationary at a high altitude, they can do so remaining there even if there were strong winds. The hot air balloon is large in both length and width. What is the halachic status of a sukkah if a hot air balloon is seen hovering directly above it? May this render the sukkah invalid. So here's an issue that he's saying. So you look at the words. He's saying, I've been struck by new matter that has never been risen before. Right? He's saying, no one ever brought this up because it didn't exist until now. It's a new invention. And so the rabbis are being attentive to the world around them, recognizing the questions and having confidence that with the proper effort, with the siyata d'shmaya, with help from heaven, they will come to the proper conclusion. So he replied, drawing from laws of impurity, which has to do with laws of coming in contact with a corpse, which in Jewish law, if you come in contact with a corpse, then that makes the person impure. And one of the ways of becoming impure is by being under the same roof, what's called an ohel, under the same roof as a dead corpse. So if you were in the same building, the same tent or whatever, you would, if you were under the same, if there was a corpse there, then that would make you impure. So, yes, if there was a dead body and you were under that same roof, that would be considered impure. Today, these questions are not so relevant because purity or impurity are not so relevant today because we don't have to go to the temple, where you have to be pure or, be concerned with certain issues. But it's either by touching a dead body or being under the same roof as a dead body. So now comes the question, the Talmud has a question, what if you have something floating over the two, you and the corpse? If you're outside, not inside, if you're outside and you had something floating over, would that consider a tent? Would that consider an ohel? Would that consider you being under the same roof? So text number 12, the Mishnah says, the following do not bring impurity, a flying cloak and a ship floating on the water. Now, whatever a flying cloak means, if that's actually possible or not. But the point is, had there been something flying, then that would not bring impurity, the fact that it flew over you, that would not be considered under the same roof. However, if the ship is tied with something that keeps it steady, or a stone on a cloak holding part of it down, they can bring impurity. So if there was something that was actually tying it down, that could be an issue. So therefore, going back to he said similar, what would be considered something that is a tent over this sukkah? So he says, if it's something that's tied down, sometimes you have these balloons like, for PR or whatever, they have these balloons that are floating. It could be a huge balloon, but it's tied down to the ground. So if it's tied down and that's over the sukkah, that would be a problem. But if it's just floating in the air, then he says that would not be considered putting a cover over that sukkah. Let's go back to text 13. By grace of God, the third Chol Hamoed of Sukkot, the Honorable Rabbi and Scholar Moshe Perlmutter, Rabbi of Lodz, live and be well. Due to Chol Hamoed, I'll be brief and respond. Secondly, as explained in chapter 8 of Mishnah Orlot, the ship floating over on water or flying cloak do not bring impurity. This is true even if they are stationary, as noted by the commentaries. Only when the ship is tethered to land, and only when the stone is placed on the edge of the cloak does it qualify as a tent. Accordingly, in our case, the hot air balloon is not considered a tent and does not invalidate the sukkah beneath it because it is not tethered to the ground. So this was the case of the flying tent. If it's unanchored, it would be halachically insignificant. If it is anchored down, then that would be considered a halachic tent. And that would be problematic in the case of the sukkah, because that would mean that you're not sitting under the sky, rather you are sitting under a tent. And so does a hot air balloon pose a halachic problem for a sukkah? No, since it is not anchored to the ground. And just to end off with this final point, which is a lot of these seem like just technical issues. But the truth of the matter is there's something much deeper that's happening here. And the truth of the matter is, it's not only the rabbi's job, but it's every Jew's job when we study Torah. This takes us back even to the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses. By the case of Moses throwing down the tablets, Moses could have asked God and said, God, what should I do? But God wanted that Moshe Rabbeinu, that Moses should come to a conclusion based on the teachings of the Torah that he has. And the same thing, the creativity of the human mind is part of what Torah is about. Torah is not just a list of commands. It's not just a list of rules saying this is what you should do. Torah is God's mind coming down into a human mind. And God says, you be part of this process as well. And when you are able to come to new ideas, what we call a finish, a new idea in studying Torah, you are now elevating your world of Torah and contributing to the greater aspect of Torah as a whole. So it's not just that we're trying to see what we should do, but we are actually contributing to the Torah by participating in this process. Even if you're asking the question is also bringing Torah as well. Text number 14, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. Every one of us can reveal the secrets of wisdom, to reveal the innovative new insights in halacha, agada, to reveal dimensions of Torah in the Kabbalistic sphere. Indeed, we are obliged to do so to perfect our souls. So each and every one of us has certain aspects of the Torah that we're connected to. When we study Torah, we have to try and find new innovation within Torah itself. Of course, it has to have the right anchor, the right foundation. We can't just come up with new ideas based on whatever we want. But when we have the right foundation for those teachings, and now we are going to inspire with our own mind, with our own wisdom, to bring new aspect to the Torah, this is essentially the purpose of the partnership, so to speak, between God and the Jewish people by studying the Torah that God has given us. So you have the Torah law, you have the human mind, and the approach is to Torah that bridges the gap between heavens and earth.
3. Precedent in practice. 1. Moses' decision to break the tablets was an act of halakhic reasoning by analogy. God affirmed his conclusion. This set a precedent for rabbinic decision-making. Rabbis applying existing Torah principles when facing new questions and winning divine approval. 2. Whether it was Rabbi Yosef Kalon's bold ruling obligating all communities to help free the Regensburg prisoners, or Rabbi Yitzhak Bar Sheshet's nuanced handling of a synagogue seat shortage in Shativa, the response of literature shows how rabbis applied existing Talmudic law to unique and unexpected situations. 3. Halachic rulings don't exist in a vacuum. Yosef Kalon's decision wasn't just a legal interpretation. It was informed by a sharp reading of the anti-Semitic climate of its time. 4. Judaism sees human innovation as part of the divine plan, meant to be harnessed for goodness, holiness. But the emergence of the new, the astrolabe during the Middle Ages, hot air balloon in modern times, often raises new halachic questions. Rabbis have historically met these advances with a commitment to applying timeless principles to modern developments. 5. When we apply Torah law to new realities, we forge a sacred and profound bond between the human mind and God's. Every Jew is called upon to apply the Torah to new realities. While practical rulings are reserved for qualified experts, engaging in this process in a conceptual manner deepens our relationship with the Torah, with God.
Okay. Next week, counterweights, consider the push and pull between halachic decisions. And don't forget, you can go to myjli.com/CCRR. Reminder for everyone that we have a Tu B'Shvat event tonight, as well as the conclusion of the study of Rambam.